In the Sea of Monsters, we meet a character named Tantalus, who is acting as the interim activities director since Chiron is being replaced. It is explained that he is on parole from the fields of punishment in the underworld, and the only reason given for why he was down there was because he tried to feed the gods human flesh, and that's probably the extent of what is likely going to be revealed in Season 2 of the Disney Plus series. But the full story goes so much deeper than that. There are actually 3 common stories for why Tantalus was sentenced to punishment down to the underworld. But thanks to the Sea of Monsters, we seemingly know which of these stories is canon to the Percy Jackson universe. Since it's hinted that he tried to feed the gods human flesh, we know where to focus our attention. Originally, Tantalus was the demigod king of Sipylus, but in the Percy Jackson universe, he was the king of a city named Tantalus, or Tantalus, depending on pronunciation, which he was named after. Like many Greek figures, he was a victim of his own pride. He wanted to know if the gods could truly know everything, and so he decided to put his theory to the test when he was personally invited up to Mount Olympus by his father Zeus in order to feast with the gods. While he was up there, he asked his father if he could bring nectar and ambrosia back to the people of his kingdom and forever be known as the person who brought down the food of the gods. In the world of Percy Jackson, we know that eating or drinking nectar and ambrosia is deadly to mortals, but in the original myth, it makes regular beings immortal. So even if he had brought some ambrosia and nectar down with him, he wouldn't have been able to do anything with it since most of the people in his kingdom were presumably human. Either way, however, Zeus denied his request and was personally offended that Tantalus would even suggest such an idea. Tantalus, however, was enraged by his father's comments and began to view the gods as vain and self-righteous, which, to be fair, isn't totally wrong, but don't let the gods know that. He became convinced that even the gods were not truly all-powerful and they did not, in fact, know everything. In order to trick them and to prove that they were not omniscient, he murdered his own son, a young boy of the name of Pelops, and if you know anything about Greek mythology, it's that familial murder that is severely frowned upon. It's why so many figures across mythology choose to imprison family members that are fated to overthrow them, or why so many infants are either left out in the woods or thrown in a river to die, because that way, no one actually killed anyone, we suppose. Tantalus, however, was far too prideful for such subtlety, so he killed his son, cooked him into a stew, and then he brought it to Mount Olympus in order to share with the gods. He wanted to make amends for their previous fight, and so as a peace offering, he provided them with the best earthly stew known to man. When he served them, he thought that they would be too oblivious to notice that they were eating human flesh, but Tantalus, like most mortals who try to challenge the gods, failed miserably. The gods immediately knew what he had done, and they were outraged that not only would he try to trick them, but they would kill his son to do it, which again, killing family is a huge problem in Greek mythology. The only goddess who didn't immediately know that something was wrong was Demeter, and most accounts claim that she was still preoccupied with the recent kidnapping of Persephone. As far as we know, this is why she was distracted in the Percy Jackson universe as well. As a brief side note, Persephone lives half the year down in the underworld with Hades, which is why spring seems to disappear for half the year. And even though that's a much longer story to get into right now, Demeter is Persephone's mother, and was obviously bothered that her daughter had just been abducted by the Lord of the Underworld. Since she didn't realize that anything was wrong, however, she ended up eating Pelops' shoulder, but when she was informed, she was on board with the rest of the gods, who, by the way, were furious. And as far as we're aware, we don't actually see Pelops in the Percy Jackson series outside of the Greek gods book, and you might say, well, yeah, that's because he's dead. But not quite. You see, after Tantalus' plan was uncovered, the gods decided to break one of their most ancient rules, which was meddling in the life or death of mortals. They could interfere in the course of a mortal's life whenever they wanted, and usually they did so just because it was fun, but bringing mortals back from the dead was usually forbidden. But in such an extreme case, they decided to make an exception. They put Pelops back together, but they were unable to restore one of his shoulders, the one that Demeter had inadvertently eaten, so they replaced it with an ivory prosthetic. For the remainder of his mortal life, Pelops was pretty well off. He became an expert charioteer, and some versions of his story even say that he was personally gifted a chariot from Poseidon himself. So all in all, he lived a pretty decent life after his first unfortunate death. Tantalus, however, did not. Zeus struck him down then and there, incinerating him with the Master Bolt and personally escorting his soul down to the depths of the underworld. He turned him over to Hades, where his punishment was devised. For the crime of serving human flesh to the gods, he was placed waist deep in a spring of clean, fresh water, the kind you drink at 3 a.m. and swear is divine. Above his head was a fruit tree, with several branches within arm's length of Tantalus, but he was sentenced to eternal starvation. Anytime he tried to place his hands or face in the water to drink, the water would recede away from him, and every time he tried to reach up to any of the fruit, the branches would pull away, ensuring that he could always see and smell the food and water, but could never actually eat or drink anything. We know that he lived this way for several thousand years, until the events of the Sea of Monsters. Right now, we don't know how large his role in the Disney Plus series will be, or how it'll be different from his counterpart in the books, but in the series, we know that Talia's tree is poisoned before Percy gets to camp. As the son of Kronos, Chiron is the prime suspect, and even though the campers know better, the camp is being restructured, and Chiron is being replaced until further notice. Why the gods thought Tantalus of all people was the best choice to teach a camp of children is actually fascinating, but we're in the process of making a full video on that topic, so be sure to be on the lookout for that if you're interested. We do know, however, that his curse did follow him. And even though he was no longer placed in the pool, food and water continued to run away from him. Not much is known about his life after getting back to the underworld, but he presumably went back to the Fields of Punishment and resumed the remainder of eternity. But that was Tantalus' true crime, and the real reason why he was in the Fields of Punishment. If you love Percy Jackson and would like to see more of stuff like this, be sure to let us know what you want us to talk about. We love this series, and we love talking about this series, and we'd love it if you joined in the conversation. As always, take care, my friends, and we'll see you in the next one.